So as more users start to take on Octane for Blender, I'm starting to see the same issues rise up again and again for new users, and a lot of them seem to be to do with color management. And I don't think this is entirely new users' fault. I think there is some design issues that need to be addressed from the devs, which I'll cover later on. But I just wanted to create a video just covering the basics of how to manage color when working within Blender Octane as it currently stands, which is in the 3.2 Blender build. You might be a bit further behind if you're on the non-paid tier, but the issues are as they are up until this point, unless the devs address anything, in which case I'll make another video and cover the changes. But this image here is essentially highlighting the first one. So this is actually one of the Blender Splash images, but it is converted to Octane, so we are rendering Octane here. And this is one of the first complaints, or main complaints, you'll see from the users, is my image looks washed out. So why is this happening? Because I think that's the most important thing to understand, is when it comes to technical issues, you want to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Why is this happening to my image? Because if you come up with issues later on, if you've only learnt the solutions, you have a less of a basis for problem solving new issues. Whereas if you have an understanding of what's going on, then you're more likely to be able to process and problem solve things on your own. So what's happening here essentially is, well, a couple things. Is Blender has its color management settings. Okay, and in cycles, this is all there is. There's no cycles color management with Blender's color management on top. You just use the color management, and that's your go-to. So you've got your filmic, all your display devices, exposure gamma, everything is just contained within this box. In Octane, it's different. So Octane is rendering elsewhere. That's why you have your render server active as you're rendering. And then that image that Octane is rendering is fed into your Blender, in which case it's then subject to this color management. So effectively what's happening is you're going through two steps of color management and you're doubling the effect. So the solution you'll read most is simply switch to raw. And now essentially what you're doing is you're just turning off, or saying to Blender, do not change anything about this image. You're going to get an image in, you're not going to apply filmic, you're not going to apply the standard sRGB transform, you're just going to leave it as it is and display it. So that should all be fine. So you might be thinking pretty quickly, well, I was quite enjoying the filmic. You know, this kind of low dynamic range clipping happens very quickly, and when you've been used to using filmic, you might find this annoying. So there's a few things you can do. So firstly, you can consider Octane's own tone mapping. So it does have highlight compression, as you can see, which will pull down the highlights similar to what you're used to in filmic. And it will be an improvement for sure. It won't be perfect, and you can clearly see some issues arising in a few areas, but for the most part you might think, yeah, it's okay. But you might still want filmic, or you might still want another transform that you're used to. And so you might think, okay, well, I have filmic built into Blender, why don't I just use that? Can I just turn off Octane's color management, so this isn't doing anything, and then just use filmic here? And on the basis of it, it starts to appear like it's working. But this is where there's some nasty things behind the scenes with this add-on that you're not really seeing up until this point. And so it looks okay, right? It looks roughly there. I mean, everything looks quite flat. But if I were to bump up this exposure, right, something crazy, I don't know how obvious it would be. Well, first of all, there's still some issues, but they're issues with filmic itself. But you notice this isn't white. This is grey, and you might question why that is, because surely we've just moved from using Octanes to using Blender's colour management, and it works with Filmic. So if I were to set this to raw, you can see obviously it's clipping a lot more, but you're actually getting white here. This is going to be, from a display at least, this is just 111, right? Whereas here, it's less than that, but it's fully clipping out. So this is a suggestion that something's still going wrong. And again, it comes down to not being able to use anything within this color management section. The same goes for exposure and gamma. We don't touch anything here. But, you know, if you're used to working within Filmic, what do? Well, you can still load up Filmic. That can be done by going into the Octane add-on settings here, and then under OTIO you can find whatever config you fancy. So if you click use other config file and open up, you can go and actually go into Blender's own color management or download Filmic from Choice of Vodka, the creator, his GitHub, find the OCIO file, load it here, and then they will appear in this section. Okay, this is a customized version. I've got a few more options here, but it has got the basics too. So I can load Filmic within this section. Okay, so you might think, well, why did you not just show me this immediately? Why did you bother showing that it doesn't work down here? And that comes down to one main reason, which is what blend, and it kind of reflects back on what I said at the start. Octane is rendering and then sending an image to Blender. Now that process takes time. So what the Octane add-on does is it doesn't send your full image. It sends a clipped version of your image to the screen. Okay? Which is why if I were to do what I did before, go back to linear and do it here, you're not getting a full image and applying Filmic to it. You're getting a clipped version of the image, like a display output, and then you're applying Filmic. So here we're never getting a value more than 1, and then Filmic's being applied on top of it, and it's getting pulled down from 1 to something lower. Whereas here, and actually you can see, if I go back to raw, how much better the performance is. You're not seeing those issues you saw before. Okay. So again, why do we need to know? Because this isn't the extent of the problem. This is where most users would stop. They understand that color management needs to reach this point, but then they think, right, I'm done, I figured it out. Unfortunately not. And to be clear, so whenever you have an OCIO running, the reason why this isn't still linear is this just overrides all these settings. So the highlight compression, white saturation, all of this won't change here. Okay? So, where is this going to rear its head again? Well, it's actually when it comes to rendering and saving your images. Okay? Because you're going to remember the image that Blender is handling is a smaller version, a clipped version of the image compared to what Octane has. Okay, and this is just essentially because it's streaming it. Okay, so if you're streaming a video, you don't get the full version of the video, you get a compressed version. This isn't compressed in many ways other than just data that can't be viewed normally, which is values above 1, etc. It's just cut off, so you're not going to see that information. So why display it? Well, the problem is you might want it later on. Okay, so if I were to render this image out, which I will do here, 1 second, begin rendering. It might take a little while. Okay, with this image rendered, You probably expect to do what you always do with the Blender, which is image, save as, find somewhere good to save it, and save it. So that's exactly what I'll do. I'll just go Blender, save, render, window. Okay. And if I could type render, just to make clear what this is. Okay, save it as an EXR, all my settings there, perfectly as I would normally. Okay. What I should have made clear is I also have my Octane output enabled. Okay. And what this is going to do is this is Octane's saving. Okay. So it's separate from all of your Blender stuff. It's just Octane immediately save an image. And later we'll compare these, but I wanted to show also compositing as well. So I'll compare the image I just saved then, and also the image that Octane just saved. Okay. And yeah, this is another thing that comes up. So in the same way that you can't just adjust things here, because this happens post Octane, anything in the compositor in the same blend file will be subject to the same problems here. Okay, so even though we rendered with Filmic, so we have Filmic set here, because it's not a global Filmic, it's not like we do within Cycles where we have Filmic here. If I were to get an exposure node and increase the exposure, this is going to clip without Filmic. It's not going to run through Filmic at all. And it's also going to have the added problem of being a clipped image to begin with, so there are no values under that. So if I were to drop the exposure here, oh, it lets me. You can see these are going grey. Okay, it's not an HDR image basically. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new scene actually. To view those two images we just rendered. Okay, I'm going to switch back to Cycles. I'm going to set this to Filmic, because those EXRs we saved are going to be linear, so they're not going to have Filmic applied to them, or shouldn't have Filmic applied to them at all. They're just going to be a base EXR, should just be raw render data. But yeah, so we're going to remove the render layers because we don't need that, and we're just going to get an image node, get a preview up, go to where we saved this, and these are our two images. You can already see there's a small difference in the image size, but yeah, first of all I'm going to load Octane export. Okay, and this is the one that Blender saved on its own. Okay, and see, this is everything is what you'd expect really. So Filmic's now being applied here. Okay, so if I were to do as I did before, and this is how you would composite things if you wanted to composite things. Don't do it in the same file where you've got all your raw set here. Create another blend file, load up your saved DXRs, and simply use it as intended. You can see I can increase the exposure. It's not going to clip out horribly. It's going to work exactly as I want to. Okay, and if I'd do the exposure test in the opposite direction as well. So if I minus this, you can see how this isn't just turning grey. This is visibly brighter in these areas. Actually, the colour that was disappearing up here becomes visible, and it's a proper HDR image basically. You're not getting any greys, it's just getting darker and darker. So every time I double click it brings up an area. You might just have to ignore that. I think that's one of my add-ons going funny. But yeah, it looks good. It looks as you'd expect, and this is what you would do. This is part of the approved workflow, as it were. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this and load the one we saved before. Now already you can see issues arising. Okay, so looking at it, yeah, we've immediately got a problem, and it's the same problem we thought we had before. Okay, if I set this to raw, it will appear correct, and it's got the view transform basically applied, which is not what we wanted. Because when you save a file normally in Blender, it understands you have a view transform over the top and reverts it, and so you save a linear image as an EXR and it will not apply the view transform, just as you want. But it doesn't understand that same concept when it's done it on Octane side of things, because as far as it's concerned, there was no view transform. So you might think again, maybe I just set this to sRGB, okay? And again, this is coming into the same problem where things have been clipped. It's exactly as it was before. Right, if I drop this down, don't double click, you can see this is going flat and grey, and just to compare, we can add minus, sorry, can I type? Okay. Oh my god, I really can't type the right thing. Okay, minus 4.5, here we go. So if we compare these two images, you can see that flattened loss of highlights, where the image we've saved is simply missing all of that data. Okay, and so if you were to comp after this, if you saved out AOVs and tried to recomp an image, you will encounter exactly this issue. You won't be able to comp together all your AOVs, because you won't be able to reassemble an image with all that missing data. You won't match what you matched before. And so, yeah, that kind of highlights the main issues. And I feel like this is so beneath the surface from what an average user trying to use the add-on should have to understand. I feel like it comes under issues with the add-on and how it's implemented currently. I mean, I can see as a compromise, maybe it's acceptable that for the viewport we use, the color management set here, but I don't think it's acceptable that for final images that you can't use the save, because this is just such an intuitive function that any Blender user is going to just assume works, because it's how it works with any other external render engine implemented within Blender. It works with all the default render engines. It's just Octane where you've got these pitfalls. And so I just wanted to highlight these issues because I see it cropping up in multiple places. Again, like people that have saved out their renders and they're trying to recomp them together in whatever compositing software they're using, and then suddenly their images don't look correct, and simply the only thing they've done wrong is they saved their image from here. And if you didn't know these color issues existed, it's going to be a long journey before you find out exactly what went wrong. And I think it's really unfortunate, because a lot of these kind of issues, when new users come across them, it's just going to tear them away from the add-on. I think it needs to be addressed kind of at base level. I don't know what kind of performance you get streaming the whole image to viewport, but it certainly seems like other add-ons are able to manage it, so I'd like to see Octane at least try. But yeah, to re-summarize, everything that we can do working in the add-on for now is whenever you're using the add-on, raw, no look, no exposure, no gamma changes, and whenever you want to save an image, always use Octane output. Either here, or what also works is, this scene takes a little while to start rendering, but okay, now this image is rendering. What you can also do is you can load up Octane's own viewport, in this Blender version or Blender Octane version combination of, for whatever reason, this doesn't work. It doesn't display the image. It should just be an exact reflection of here. This is where this is streaming that information from, but somewhere along the way this is broken. But yeah, essentially you can save from here with this save function, and we'll save AOVs, and this is going to be the exact same as Octane output here. And sometimes that's sorry, not there, Octane output here. And sometimes that's useful because if you've been running for 40 minutes, an hour, and you realise that you're one tick box away from having your image actually rendered, or a terrible version of it where half the data is missing, it could be a nice, crutch to save the image you've rendered out. And whilst I think of it, there's also one more issue I forgot to address at the start. I may as well address it now, which is that I mentioned before you can use this panel here to control Octane's color management, but these are actually set per camera. So this one is set to control everything in the viewport. I'm actually viewing the scene camera here, but if I were to jump out of that, you'll notice it's the same. And that's because I've enabled override, but normally that wouldn't be enabled. And essentially every camera you have in your scene is going to have a copy of these settings here in the camera settings. So you'll notice down here I have a camera imager. I don't have this enabled. I personally like to just use the override function, and that can be the override function exists essentially so that you can just control the settings of everything in one place, which is what I like to do. I mean, sometimes you might fancy having certain settings in your render camera that you don't want in your preview, but other times you might be looking at your scene like this, not have override enabled, and then jump into your main camera, and then suddenly these settings aren't being used and your render starts to look different. Or you were working in it like this and you click F12 and it's going to render from this camera and all your render settings aren't going to get used. So that's also another common pitfall that I probably should have covered at the start, but at least I feel like I've covered it now. But yeah, the solution to that is either choose settings on the camera and viewport that match, or simply click override and it will apply to both. Okay. Yeah, there might be more things I might cover in the future, like what's going on here with all these extra options and why you might want to pick those over using the Filmic output, because there's a few interesting things going on there. But yeah, that'd be for another video. I'll also touch on why you should or shouldn't use the Aces option too, because I'm sure a couple people saw that tick box there as I was changing the highlight compression and figured that might be a solution. But that comes more into the topic of more general color management outside of issues and pitfalls. So if I do make another video, I'll cover those. I think for now that's covered most things, and hopefully this video will get invalidated because we'll get an update from the Octane team, or it will change over when they do the overhaul to make it a add-on only add-on, as it were, rather than a full separate Blender build. But we'll see. Like I said, I'm hopeful that things will change, and hopefully I get to make another video saying that this is no longer up to date. Hope this helps.